We're going to give it a few seconds to let folks pile in and join the Zoom. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our How We Got It Built series featuring HHH projects throughout Los Angeles. We are excited today to be hearing from the Decro group on their most recent project in Echo Park titled Firmin Court. So without further ado, before I pass it over to them, I want to give a few housekeeping notes. First of all, there's at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. Please put any questions that you have for our presenters in that box as opposed to the chat box. And that way we can easily pull it at the end of the conversation and share it with them. And don't forget that we also send out the recordings and a survey afterwards and the slide deck so that you will all have this to look over at your leisure. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ted Handel, the CEO of the Decro Group, and Gabriela Vega, who is a project manager there. So go ahead. Thank you for joining us.
Adriana, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Ted Handel, Decro Corporation CEO. Joining me today is Gabriela Vega, Decro's Community Relations Manager. We're here to discuss how Decro built Firmin Court. A little more than 6 years ago, I was hired as Decro's CEO. At that time, Decro's development cupboard, if you will, was bare. Yes, we had some developments in the past, but we had no new developments in the pipeline to look forward to. In 2017, Jay Samuel, a broker, approached me and said that there were 3 properties over by Temple and Boylston that were available for sale. We looked at the properties and we thought they might be potential candidates for the development of an affordable housing project. Next slide, please. During this webinar, we will cover how Decro went from acquiring these sites to where we are today, just a moment away from having the building powered and finishing construction of a 64-unit permanent supportive and affordable housing project. And every step that went on from one side to the other, from one end to the other. This includes assembling the development and construction team, obtaining financing, securing entitlements, overcoming obstacles, and resolving construction challenges. During our discussion, we will also try to offer tips, lessons learned that you might find useful in developing your own projects. Next slide, please. Starts with the site. This is the site. This is Firmin Street, or about 100 or so years ago, if you were in Los Angeles, you would have known it as Fireman Street. Firmin Court comprised 3 parcels. 418 Firmin, which had a home on it, 424, which is a vacant lot here in the middle, and 430, the home to my left. The parcels are located near the interchange of the 101 and 110 freeway. And if you look at the map, Angelino Heights would be on the other side of the 101 freeway. So we're just, I guess, south of it, but I'm not satisfying directions. Our first task was to take the temperature of the local city council office. That is, would the local council member support the development of an affordable housing project on this site? Yes, said council member Jill Cedillo's staff. Why? Well, it went beyond the obvious need for housing, but also because of Eastview, a market rate project located immediately behind Firmin Court on Boylston Street, basically a counterweight to the market rate project to have the affordable housing project here. Once we received these preliminary expressions of support, we had 3 issues that we needed to investigate. The first was, were there any abandoned oil wells on the parcels since the properties are located in the LA City oil field? What was the status of the home at 430 Firmin? Could it be potentially characterized as historic? And finally, why was the lot at 424 Firmin vacant? Some of these issues we will cover during the course of the webinar today. Next slide, please. Decro needed to assemble a development team to assess these issues, to conduct project due diligence, and to help us create a viable financial and development model, ultimately for the project. As you can see here, we had 14 different consultants behind us. They included Deanna Bly at CHPC, who provided financial modeling, Craig Lawson and his staff who did entitlements, Gerard Garabedian and Dowlin, the architect, Roger Witham and Essel, environmental, Lisa Pastor, our legal counsel, Jeff McConnell, government and community relations, Paul Peroth and Blake Jackson at Walton Construction, Freddie Panero, our construction manager, Eric Brandt, the house mover, Terry Dickerhoff, permit expediter extraordinaire, exceptional individual in that field. Tim McCormick, CASP, Taylor Loudon is our historic architect. If I overlooked anybody, my apologies. Next slide, please. As we began assembling the team, we turned our attention to two key tasks. First was to finance the project, and the other was to secure entitlements. In December 2017, Decro submitted the first application in the first competitive HHH round for financing for Firmin Court. At the time, what was then known as HZLA required that applicants have also social service experience, which Decro did not have. We approached Innovative Housing and Rochelle Mills. They had that experience, and we welcomed them as our partner in the project. In February 2018, Firmin Court was one of 16 projects to be awarded Bob HHH money in the first round. About a year later, we also qualified for some supplemental financing due to, of course, cost overruns with the project. 2 months later, in 2018, the New Generation Fund and Enterprise stepped up and provided us with about $3 million in acquisition and pre-development funding. Next slide, please. Total project costs are projected to be $43 million. Tax-exempt bonds covered approximately $22 million in development and construction costs. LAHD has loaned us about $12 million for Firmin. Enterprise, with CIT Bank as its tax credit investor, contributed or will contribute $14 million in tax equity to the project partnership. For permanent financing, CIT Bank will also be stepping up and providing a loan of about $7.4 million. We have also qualified for a SHP MHP loan from the Housing Community Development Department of the state of approximately $5.7 million. Next slide, please. The other critical issue, getting entitlements. Firmin Court is located in what is called the Central City West Specific Plan. This was a plan adopted by the City Council in 1991, and it allowed multifamily housing to be built on Firmin Street. However, there are two more critical, I'll say, acronyms, 7 letters that were essential to allowing Firmin Court to go forward: CEQA and TOC. Firmin Court was among the first, if not the first, affordable housing project to qualify in Los Angeles for a statutory exemption under CEQA, not a categorical exemption. Why is the distinction important? Because it meant that if the project and the entitlements were challenged in court, the burden of proof would shift from the city and the developer to the project opponents to demonstrate that the project did not meet CEQA requirements and thus was not entitled to an exemption. It's a pretty heavy legal burden to meet. So that distinction of getting a statutory exemption was very important for the project. The project also was designated as a TOC Tier 3 project. Why was that important? Because it allowed the project to expand in its physical size, its height, and most importantly, in the number of units that we could construct. If my memory is correct, we had a by right ability to build 45 units. With the TOC 3 designation, the project went to 64 units. Gabby, let me turn it over to you to discuss the challenge that we faced with the local neighbors in the Echo Park Neighborhood Council.
Well, before we get to that, Ted, let's talk about how we created the design concept. Thank you. And so as we were putting together the entitlement and financing for Firmin Court, we began to explore design options. We did not want a contemporary building given the size of the project. So we presented this photo to the left of Hotel California to Dolan Group as an inspiration to Firmin Court. And by the side-to-side comparison, you can see the similarities that these two photos have. We borrowed many of the design elements that represent the California Spanish Mediterranean style. Everything to the arch entry, all the way to the roof where you'll see the red tiles on the top. Next slide. When it came to incorporating the design into the site, the design team had to overcome many challenges. The site geometry, Firmin Street grade, the must-have amenities, and the on-site utility equipment. As you can see, the regular shape, what I want to call a trapezoid, there was a need and outdoor requirements. And so we took the community spaces and outdoor spaces. The project site being on a hill posed another challenge, but we managed to work around that by putting in two entryways into the building, one lower level and the other upper level. In the sense to accommodate the 12 parking spaces for the supportive services providers. Another challenge was housing the mechanical and plumbing equipment, including the HVAC condensers, boiler tanks, and solar panels required to achieve LEED Gold certification. All equipment was successfully placed on the roof. We even had to double stack some of the condensers to make room for all this equipment. Next slide. But before we can break ground, I will pass it back to Ted to talk more on the other challenges we faced during this project.
Gabby, thank you. Beyond the architectural issues that we had to deal with, Firmin Court had other challenges to deal with as well. The first, identify any existing oil wells in the park system. Not insurmountable, as I learned when I was in private law practice representing LTSC on a neighboring project, but a challenge nonetheless. Picture being in Los Angeles about 130 years ago again. If you were walking outside downtown LA, as you can see in this picture over here at First and Belmont, you would have been accustomed to seeing oil derricks dotting the landscape. It was just rife with oil, as you can see in the map. We believed that the 3 Firmin Street properties, that there was between 1 to 3 oil wells on the property. So we retained Essel Environmental and Roger Witham to investigate this situation. Eventually, Roger was able to determine that there was only 1 oil well behind the house at 418 Firmin. Yes, that wooden block, that pipe, is all that remains of the oil well. So they prepared a detailed plan to cap the well, which is at about 800 or so feet below ground, and insert what they call a concrete slurry in the pipe. So we retained, based upon the plan, we hired Allen Co. Who's Derek, you can see in this slide here, to handle the actual abandonment of the well. And cannot stress that from the abandonment of the well to putting in the last bit of slurry to capping the well, that there was no margin for error. No blowouts, no oil leakage, no excessive leaking of methane gas. Could not do any of that. We were also, as you can see from the one photo here, under the strict supervision of the LA City Fire Department, LA County Fire Department was involved, Cal Gyms was involved. We relied on Roger and Essel to make sure we were in compliance. And today, all that remains of the oil well is that concrete cone and pipe, which have been integrated into the house and into the Firmin court itself. You won't actually physically see it. Finally, let me on this topic address one other issue. Is it possible that additional oil wells still exist on the property? The answer is no. Essel and Roger thoroughly combed the property to see if there was any evidence, any traces of oil or any other substance that might have alerted us to the existence of another well. No such evidence was ever found. We also learned historically that locating oil wells, especially in the LA oil field, is a very imprecise art. This is because oil drilling goes back to the 1880s and 1890s, which is probably when this well was dug. However, the state and Cal Gyms' predecessor didn't come into existence until 1915. So today, the records are very imprecise as to the location of wells. And if you're drilling anywhere in these areas, something to bear in mind, both in terms of the consultants you hire, the person or the company that you hire to retain to do the actual abandonment. And as it says here, just to be vigilant to avoid any potential issues. Next slide, please. The other challenge, relocating the house at 430 Firmin. The city determined that this house was an example of early suburbanization, as it was on the other side of Beaudry and Boylston. So our obligation as part of our entitlements was to preserve the house. We tried originally to donate the house to Heritage Square, but that proved to be unfeasible. However, we were fortunate to find a lot in front of Heritage Square's property that was vacant and where we could put the house. So we bought it. We were equally fortunate at the time to learn of Eric Brandt and Brandt House Movers. To avoid the exorbitant costs and challenges of Caltrans and CHP and other regulatory bodies in terms of moving a house, we quartered the house. Yes, we cut it into 4 pieces. And yes, we could retain still the historical integrity with Taylor Loudon supervision. And so what we did was we created a plan to move the house through city streets, underneath underpasses, and without any potential conflict with overhead wires. So we began one morning. We started from Firmin on to Temple. From Temple, we went to Alvarado. From Alvarado, we went to Olympic. From Olympic, we made a left onto Main. Yes, we took the house pieces past City Hall, through Chinatown, and eventually to their final location at Pasadena Avenue in Highland Park. And yes, when we delivered the first houses, we even had to overcome the fact that Pasadena Avenue was being repaved. We were not daunted by that challenge. Next, so as the slide shows here, this is the property as it originally existed, and then the house after we moved it before the construction of the ADU. As we were going through this process, Eric Brandt unfortunately passed away unexpectedly. Eric was very well respected, not only locally for house moving, but throughout the state of California. Fortunately, we were introduced after Eric's passing to Rick at Dinuba, Rick Ellison of Dinuba House Movers, was equally well qualified and experienced in moving houses. So Rick was responsible for storing the house, putting it after the cribbing you see here onto the ADU, and finishing that entire process. Next slide, please. Restoration of the house has now been completed, and as you can see, the bottom there's the ADU is located. And we're now about to put the house on the market. If you know anybody who's interested in a 4-bedroom house with a rentable ADU in Highland Park, located near the Gold Line, we're accepting offers right now. So, Debbie, as I misspoke a moment ago, let me turn it back to you to talk about our third challenge, the neighbors in the Echo Park Neighborhood Council.
Thank you, Ted. So what you see here in front of you is the list of meetings that we attended in 2018 and 2019. All these meetings, our sole purpose was to inform and engage the residents of the area on, what Firmin Court is and will be in the coming years. Issues that Decro confronted is that most, if not all of our neighbors that lived in the area have lived in the area for many decades. And so one of their major concerns was new construction happening in their neighborhood. And yes, the community was very vocal, which you'll see in the next slide. We listed out some of the major issues we heard from these meetings that we attended and how we responded to them. So number one on the list being Firmin Street parking. And so given that Firmin Street is a very narrow street, also a dead end, so there's one way up, one way down, there was a concern about the 64 units, and obviously the project bringing in a large amount of cars into the area. And so we responded by ensuring that the lease agreement included language around tenants not being able to park inside the building or on Firmin Street. Tenant selection was also another major concern. They were concerned about the future tenants coming in to this neighborhood, and they would classify them as criminals or pedophiles. And so we discussed the selection process and screening with the residents to help alleviate their concerns. Local gang. Yes, there is high activity of gang involvement in that neighborhood. In fact, the lead of one of the local gangs lives right across Firmin Court Street. And so the concern from the neighbors is, how are we going to prevent the local gang, going inside this project, or even gang members living inside the project? And so our response was that we connected with LAPD senior lead officer to discuss our cooperation in installing security cameras around our property, as well as inside our property, and how we would cooperate to share footage if needed. Oil well abandonment. Ted talked about how we would mitigate the concerns in case there was any blowouts or oil leaks. So I won't talk more on that. The house move. So in the 70s, these residents experienced another house move that happened then, which stirred a lot of chaos. And so their concern is, how are we going to avoid running into the similar issues when it came to moving the house on Firmin? And so the last one is COVID protocols. So our construction was, in the middle of pandemic. And so it was, the whole sensitivity was around COVID exposure and having workers on site not wearing masks or not being safe, to make sure that they didn't expose the residents to COVID. And so they were on top of us, whether, the workers were wearing their mask throughout the day. On a hot summer day, they had to wear their mask even though they were outdoors. So, we had to make sure that we had that under control because we didn't want the neighbors, having to email us pictures of workers not wearing masks. Next slide. Decro's community relations strategy. One of the strategies that we implemented at the very beginning was to create a web page, firmincourt.com, where this would be open for anyone to look into, especially the residents, because we would keep updates on that web page on construction activities happening this week, next week. I think it was a 3-week look ahead schedule that we would post, but also giving more contacts. I think my contact was on there so they can call me or message me or email me in case they're experiencing some issue with construction. And another thing was also being able to share the construction management plan with the residents and whoever requested it, which detailed the list of best construction management practices as well as a step-by-step description of construction activities. Within the web page, we also posted the community health, safety, and notification plan, which laid out the construction work schedule, which was one of the concerns, the noise that the construction activity, the noise that would be coming out of the construction activity. And so in LA, usually, construction starts at 6 in the morning, but the neighbors requested that the construction activities did not start till 7 in the morning. And so we agreed to it, and that you can also find that schedule in this notification plan, but also contacts in case there was any emergencies, who to contact, what city government agency they can contact, who were also involved in the project. But not only that, another strategy was that we kept ongoing communication with council member Cedillo staff and senior lead officer Roberto Solorio. Next page. So other construction challenges, like I mentioned earlier, Firmin Street was one way up, one way down. Their concern was, during construction, there would be obstruction of trucks or of workers trying to park on Firmin Street and taking away the neighbors' parking. And so what an alternative to that was to locate an offsite vacant lot, which luckily there was one around the corner. And so Walton was able to use that vacant lot as a staging area. So when we began receiving our supplies, our materials, equipment, we would store those in that vacant lot, as well as the workers. They would use that lot to park and avoid parking on the street. This was also a good way to keep any materials from being placed on the sidewalk. So we practically kept the street open for the neighbors. Supply chain. So given the pandemic, we did also have to find alternatives, especially in the supply chain. So Walton proactively avoided huge delays by looking into other suppliers with not that much long lead times that were expected, and so we were able to still target TCO by 2022. But one of the major construction challenges that we still currently are facing is with LADWP supplying the power. One thing is that transformers usually are located on the exterior part of the project, but the difference with Firmin Court is that the transformer is located inside the building. And so with DWP, having the transformer inside the building, it's a lengthier process, which has taken a toll on our project schedule. But not only that, also just supplying perm power overall. We're still trying to tackle that with DWP at the moment, and we're really hoping within the next few weeks we're able to source the perm power into our building and be able to hit our target. of next month. Next slide. But it was all worth it. And I'll pass it back to Ted.
Abby, thank you. With these challenges now almost behind us, since we've been successful in being able to get Firmin Court constructed, these are the amenities the residents, neighbors, and even the community will be able to look forward to as soon as we're able to open the doors. A community room where residents can congregate, and the neighborhood and community can hold meetings, much like we do at other Decro buildings, whether it's neighborhood watch meetings, whether we might potentially even entertain a neighborhood council meeting here. Firmin Court is located in an area where there are, I believe, at least 5 schools. So one thing that was very critical to us is to set aside space for a learning center, a place not only where the residents, kids and young adults could use for after school, but anyone in the neighborhood can come in and use it as an after school learning center to study, do homework. So that will be completed. We're in the process of furnishing that room right now. Interior wise, also, what was equally critical, of course, is that this is, of course, a permanent supportive housing project. And it was critical for us to work with St. Joseph Center, which we did in the overall, I'd say, design and development of the project. But in particular, as it related to having 3 case management offices located on site. We addressed issues of concern in terms of accessibility, privacy, security, both for the St. Joseph Center employees as well as for the residents themselves. Next slide, please. Outdoors, everybody will be able to enjoy this garden patio. We would hope to have events here and have a view that extends from Angelino Heights out to Lincoln Heights. And you'll see General Hospital, for example, is visible from here, all the way down to the NWD building and the station to downtown Los Angeles. And we hope to, like I said, host events here and bring the community here. Finally, one of the principles that guided us in developing this project, as far as the residents that we ultimately hope to house here, is to treat them with dignity and respect. And consistent with those principles, the question was presented: what amenities could we offer these residents that would be comparable to those provided by market rate housing, much like the Eastview project, as I said, behind us? The answer was a sky deck located on the 7th floor. This sky deck has a commanding view of all of downtown Los Angeles. And I can personally attest to what the view looks like, especially at night. It is quite stunning. So we look forward to, for many years, for our residents being able to come up here and enjoy the view from here. Next slide, please. And here it is, Firmin Court. For all practical purposes, it is completed. Technically, according to our contract, we're 96% complete. As Gabby said, we have some LEDWP issues and some touch-up work to do, but it's ready to start housing people. 64 units of affordable and permanent supportive housing, 45 units, PSH units for the chronically homeless, 18 affordable units, and of course, an on-site property manager's unit that will be operated by FBI management. Next slide, please. In closing, as we noted at the beginning, it takes an incredible team to put a project like this together. Decro is very appreciative and really thanks every one of the individuals and businesses that are referenced on this slide. This was an incredible team effort and one that we hope for many times to replicate in the future. Next slide, please. Finally, a shout out to Aaron Firmin, Firmin Court's senior project manager. If it weren't for Aaron's ingenuity, creativity, persistence, I don't know where we would be at today. in the construction process. And yes, we are very pleased to say that we have our first Decro baby, if you will, much like Pixar does in its movies. And we welcome Ryan. She was born on June 21st, 2022. Aaron and Ryan are doing well. Aaron will be back in the office, we believe, in about a month from now. So with that, we want to thank everybody for the opportunity to give us the opportunity to present Firmin Court, the issues we confronted here, and how we address them. And we welcome your questions and input. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that. So I'm going to read some of the questions from the Q&A box. If you have any other questions you'd like to ask Ted and Gabriella, please place them in the Q&A box. So first up is Alexander Lubensky. Guys Construction is a GC midway through the construction of a 54 two-bedroom units in LA. What is your criteria for selecting GCs? And how do you get added to the pool of general contractors and receive an invitation to bid?
One of the things I've learned over the years, both as Decro CEO, but going back to private practice when I represented developers and negotiated construction contracts, it really does come down to experience. And we were fortunate to have Walton, which of course has years of experience in affordable housing, because it presents its own unique issues. They go beyond just construction. There's the compliance issues, and compliance is not only just in terms of the physical building of the building, but meeting prevailing wage requirements, for example. Candidly, nothing will get a developer in trouble quicker, not to mention the contractor too, is non-compliance, even if it's inadvertent with prevailing wage requirements. So having that level of experience, it's also the relationships that a contractor brings in terms of working with inspectors, working with your construction manager, all very critical in terms of meeting your budget, building the project on time. Those are all really essential qualifications that, so I would say that if you want to bid on a future Decro project, we need to know your references, experience of other developers, and we certainly will entertain other developers for future projects.
Great. I want to shift gears to asking some questions about funding. So John asks, did you have any problematic financing deadlines?
We have problematic funding deadlines. We did need some time, ultimately in terms of, as I recall, getting CIDLAC approval of our tax exempt bond allocation. Because at the time we were trying to finance the one project using the FHA financing, which ultimately didn't work. And then of course there was COVID, where we had some additional latitude. I think probably the funding issue we had, it wasn't the funding issue per se, I would say. But now as I'm recalling, lenders, generally speaking, of course, don't want contaminated sites, and that includes properties with oil wells. So the one tip I can pass along is this, is that we abandoned the oil well, I believe it was in the spring of 2020. And we did that before we actually closed on the construction financing for the project. So we got the oil well abandoned, made sure it was all signed off. And then to meet title requirements, we had a 30-day stand down period. It's basically dealing with the GC's ability to lien the project. Once we passed that 30-day lien period, then we were able to close our construction financing. So just a tip, that if you have environmental issues and a lender doesn't want to inherit the property with those kind of concerns, they can be addressed with a cooperative lender and then a cooperative title company, and then you can start your construction financing.
Great. what funding source does the ongoing on-site services budget come from? That's from Shannon.
My recollection is that it comes from Measure H, the county measure. St. Joseph Center has a contract, if memory serves me correctly, with the county, excuse me, to fund social services on site through Measure H.
Okay, but Measure H is expiring, so I'm curious where that will come from down the line. Hopefully, we have some other measures passing that will help fund these services. My second question, or before I go into the other couple questions posted in the Q&A box, Will Wright from the AIA has asked for you to share some of the specific challenges that you experienced when dealing with LADWP to help the AIA's advocacy work around that. And so, yeah, if you could also share for the group some of those specific challenges, that'd be helpful to hear.
It's an interesting question to have after a conversation I had with our construction manager today. Because we're down to the point now, as Gabby explained, I don't know that we would necessarily have had the level of issues with DWP had we had an external transformer versus the internal one, which presents a raft of technical issues with it, which I won't go into. What I think I've heard is that DWP is understaffed, number one, and it's somewhat of a disjointed operation. And I'm just getting this anecdotally. I can't speak from firsthand experience because we haven't directly communicated with DWP. Disjointed in the sense that, for example, I applied for unit meters for the project back in July. Had a very responsive, very good DWP employee walk me through that process, thinking, okay, that was it. We would get the unit meters when we needed them as soon as the transformers were installed. So Gabby went ahead and then followed up on it, only to have the DWP employee say, we don't have any records of the meters. Well, sure enough, as they got into the application process, lo and behold, there was the application that I submitted. So we're now trying to work through that. I think one thing that's important is that when you're evaluating the development team that you bring up, that you bring into your project, if you don't have the relationships with city departments, county agencies, whatever it might be, ask your development people. Our construction manager, for example, has very good relationships with certain people at Water and Power, Building and Safety. The government relations person, your consultants in the entitlement and land use area, what their relationships are with planning. I know I'm going a little beyond the question, but very, very important to ask what their relationships are, because that'll make a world of difference in your projects.
One question we have is, have you considered modular construction for any future developments? If so, how has your experience been with modular development?
Well, the answer is yes. Decro has 4 modular projects that we are doing right now with Daylight Community Development. One is nearly completed, Watts Works, which was involved the use of shipping containers. If I understand correctly, and I may be wrong about this, the state isn't allowing that any longer. So now we're using, for these projects, rolled steel. Excuse me. It's been a real learning process. I would say that what's really critical for these projects is, I think it really comes down to basically a vetting process. A vetting process from the standpoint of really confirming that your architect has modular experience, your structural engineer has modular experience in a housing context. We're not talking about, a hotel or a bank or whatever it might be, but in affordable housing. So the architect, the structural engineer, and most importantly, your general contractor. And then, of course, there's the modular manufacturer. We've been fortunate to work with IndieDwell, and based out of Boise, Idaho, and their plant in Pueblo. We are now working with Individual to build a modular manufacturing facility in Brawley. That I believe is under construction right now, be done early next year. And why is that important? Time and cost. Because it will reduce shipping costs, shipping times here throughout Southern California. There's one final thought I had about this. You know, just a little bit out in terms of cost. Will it save time probably from there to conventional construction? Most likely, yes. But I guess the parting comment I would make on Decro's experience of modular is not every project is suited for modular. But if you're looking at that direction, evaluate it very carefully with the team that I just described a moment ago. And, really assess, do a thorough comparison with your development team in terms of the pluses and minuses of conventional construction versus modular construction before you proceed.
Wait, Ted, what makes a project more or less suitable for modular?
I don't know that I'm entirely equipped to answer that question, to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's a function of the size of the project, the location, and the amenities that you want to offer, and how the building and the project is structured. Again, we've seen, we have two conventional projects right now that overall are in the DWP, excuse me, 3 conventional projects, setting aside the DWP issues that have gone very well. But again, it's more time, it's probably be more expensive. Modular, like I said, does have a place. I really think it has to be done on a project by project basis.
Okay, that makes sense. So switching gears to the CEQA exemption. So can you talk a little bit more about the CEQA exemption? Were you using the AB 1197 statutory exemption that passed in 2019? Can you also explain why a categorical exemption is not on the plaintiff to prove what a statutory exemption is?
Yes, I do believe that we used 1197 to the best of my memory. I am not a land use or environmental attorney by background. My recollection was that there was a difference between statutory and categorical. I may be incorrect that it was the issue of the burden of proof, but certainly I do know that if you have the opportunity to get a statutory exemption, if there's the possibility of a legal challenge to your project on a continuum from statutory to categorical to negative deck, you're in a better legal position having a statutory exemption rather than categorical.
Okay. Andrew asks if Measure ULI, I'm guessing he means Measure ULA, passes in LA in November. Will that help fund further projects like this? I can also help answer that, and the answer is yes. I don't know if Ted and Gabriella, you have any thoughts on it?
This is the transfer tax measure.
Yeah. So yeah, 70% of it will go to helping build affordable housing.
But this is an allocation of transfer taxes from projects of transfer taxes of a certain amount, right?
Yeah, over 5 million of property sales. Property sales over 5 million, so only 3% of all property sales in the city of Los Angeles. But it will fund affordable housing development. So I just wanted to answer that for Andrew. But I do want to ask one more question while I have you on here, and that is around project labor agreements. Was there a PLA on this project?
The answer is no. The threshold for projects was 65 units. And no, we did not design the project to avoid a PLA. The maximum number of units we could get with the TOC designation was 64. So we do have a PLA on our Bryan project, which has 97 units. And we look forward to working closely with the Carpenters Union, other unions, in the construction of that project, which is now underway.
Great. Well, we're at 2:50. I wanted to thank you both so much for your time, and for Nicole too, who's behind the scenes doing the PowerPoint slides. Just a reminder, we'll send out the recording shortly after this call, and we're so grateful for all of you for attending today's HHH Made This project webinar series. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.